My name is Emily Carter, and for most of my 32 years, I thought I had life figured out. I had a husband, Andrew, who I believed was my partner in everything, and our little girl, Grace, who had just turned 5. After 6 years of marriage, I still woke up some mornings with a feeling that I had won the lottery. It was an ordinary suburban kind of happiness, modest and unshakable, or so I thought. We lived in a quiet neighborhood on the edge of Madison, Wisconsin, in a house with white porch railings and a maple tree that turned fiery orange every fall. It was the sort of place where people waved as they drove past, where kids biked in circles on the cul-de-sac until dusk, and where neighbors borrowed sugar without hesitation. To me, it was the picture of stability, the kind of life I had always longed for. Most days fell into the same rhythm. I worked part-time at a design shop in town, and the rest of my time was spent looking after Grace, planning meals, and keeping our home in order. On summer mornings, I would pack her little pink backpack with swimsuits, coloring books, and her favorite stuffed rabbit before dropping her off at my parents' lake cabin just outside town. They loved having her for weekends, and she adored those trips canoeing with my dad, baking cookies with my mom, staying up later than she ever could at home. For me, those weekends were a chance to breathe, to catch up on sleep, or even enjoy a rare, quiet evening with Andrew. We had our own traditions, too. Almost every Friday, Andrew would suggest driving out to Lake Mendota. We didn't own a cabin, but we'd rent a spot for the weekend or join friends at theirs. Grace would run through the tall grass barefoot, her laughter carrying across the water, while Andrew grilled hot dogs and I set out paper plates on the picnic table. Those moments felt like snapshots of a perfect family life, the kind of memories I thought would last forever. I trusted Andrew completely. He worked in sales at a local firm, which sometimes meant late nights or dinners with clients, but I never questioned it. He had always been attentive, the kind of father who built Lego castles on the living room floor, and the kind of husband who remembered to buy my favorite creamer at the grocery store. I told myself that was love, the little things, steady and dependable. For years, it was enough. Still, if I'm honest, there were small changes I noticed. Nothing glaring, nothing that screamed betrayal, just subtle things I ignored, because it was easier to believe everything was fine. He started going out more often, saying he needed to blow off steam with colleagues. Some nights, he came home later than usual, faintly scented with cologne he never wore around me. When I asked how the evening had gone, he'd answer quickly, almost too quickly, and then distract me by kissing Grace's forehead or asking what we'd had for dinner. I brushed it off, convinced he was just stressed that work was demanding, that men sometimes needed space. After all, hadn't he earned my trust? Hadn't he proven he was a good man, a good husband, a good father? So I let those doubts settle like dust in the corners of my mind, barely noticeable, easy to ignore. I focused instead on the sweetness of our routines, the way Andrew held Grace's tiny hand as they crossed the street, the way he winked at me over dinner, the way our house always smelled of laundry and apple pie. It was easier to believe in that version of our life. Back then, I had no idea how fragile the picture really was. The first ripple came one ordinary Friday afternoon when the washing machine broke down. I stood in the laundry room, staring at half-soaked clothes, frustration rising in my chest. With Andrew out for the evening, I called my friend Rachel to ask if she knew a repairman. She laughed and said, "You don't need a repairman, Emily. I'll send Ethan." Ethan Moore was her older brother, a few years older than me, and he lived just a couple of streets away. I had met him briefly at barbecues and neighborhood gatherings, but we had never spoken beyond polite greetings. Within an hour, Ethan appeared at my door with a toolbox, polite and quiet. He worked on the machine while I kept Grace entertained, and after about 40 minutes of clanking and adjusting, he had it running again. "You'll need a new part soon, but this should hold for now," he said with a nod. I was grateful, so I insisted he stay for dinner. I hadn't prepared anything fancy, just spaghetti and a salad, but Ethan didn't seem to mind. We sat around the table, Grace chattering about her preschool day, while Ethan listened with genuine interest. He was steady, thoughtful, and didn't feel the need to fill silences with unnecessary words. At the time, I thought nothing of it. To me, it was just a neighbor helping out a small kindness in a week that had been unusually busy. But something about his presence lingered afterward, not in a romantic way, but in a comforting one. He was grounded, easy to be around, and in that moment, I appreciated the simplicity of it. Later that night, Andrew came home cheerful and overly talkative. He asked what I had made for dinner, teased Grace about staying up too late, kissed my forehead. When I told him about the washing machine and how Ethan had helped, his expression flickered for just a second. Something sharp crossed his eyes before he smiled and said, "That was nice of him." I didn't see the tension for what it was. I didn't question where Andrew had really been that evening. To me, our family was still solid, still whole, still the life I had built piece by piece. The cracks were there. Yes, but I convinced myself they were hairline fractures, easy to overlook when you wanted so badly to believe everything was fine. There are nights that burn themselves into your memory, not because of what you lived, but because of what you later learned. One evening, I was folding Grace's clothes, humming absent-mindedly, while she sat on the rug drawing flowers with her markers. Andrew had told me he would be late dinner with a couple of clients, he said, as he straightened his tie in the mirror. I kissed him goodbye at the door, reminded him not to stay out too late, and that was it. That was all I knew. What I didn't know was that he was not where he claimed to be. Later, I would learn about the downtown restaurant dim lighting a table in the corner where Andrew sat across from Sophie Lane. She was younger, carefree, with a laugh that seemed designed to draw eyes, and she leaned close enough that her hand brushed his. They ordered wine, shared dessert, lingered long after the plates were cleared. And when Andrew paid the bill, they didn't part ways. He followed her home. While I tucked Grace into bed and read her favorite story about a little rabbit who wanted to see the world, Andrew was crossing a line that would unravel everything we had built. But at the time, I knew nothing. He came home after midnight, smelling faintly of whiskey, and a cologne I didn't recognize. His tie loosened his voice too bright as he whispered that everything had gone well with his clients. I believed him. I wanted to believe him. The trust I had in Andrew was like second nature, as certain as the sun rising each morning. I told myself that's what marriage was, believing, even when there were reasons not to. That summer, Rachel organized a weekend at Lake Mendota with a big group of friends and family. It wasn't unusual. We had done it many times before. I packed Grace's swimsuit, sunscreen, sandwiches, fruit, and cookies. She was practically bouncing with excitement the entire drive, chattering about swimming in the lake and roasting marshmallows. When we arrived, the day was warm, the water sparkling under a clear Wisconsin sky. Children ran barefoot through the grass, tossing frisbees, while adults spread blankets and coolers under the shade of tall trees. It was laughter and lemonade, the kind of easy joy that makes you forget about bills and burdens. At first, Andrew blended in seamlessly. He manned the grill with a couple of the men laughing and flipping burgers. Grace splashed in the shallow water with Rachel squealing every time a wave touched her toes. I sat on a blanket pouring lemonade, thinking how lucky I was. For a while, everything seemed perfect. But then, Andrew's smile faltered. His eyes fixed somewhere across the picnic area, and tension settled in his shoulders. I followed his gaze but thought little of it. There were new faces that day, friends of friends, people I hadn't met before. Normal, I told myself. What I didn't know was that one of those faces belonged to Sophie Lane. She had come with a friend, blending easily into the group, her laughter loud, her gaze searching until it landed on Andrew. He stiffened when he saw her quickly looking away, but the damage was done. Beneath the cheerful chatter and sizzling grill, the undercurrent of something forbidden rippled just out of my sight. Later, I would learn from Rachel what really happened. She had slipped into the woods to take a call in peace, her phone pressed to her ear. That was when she saw them, Andrew and Sophie, standing too close, heads bent together, the unmistakable intimacy of people who shouldn't be touching. Rachel froze, her heart racing, and without even thinking, she raised her phone and pressed record. She told me later she didn't know why, Maybe because she knew I deserved the truth. Maybe because she needed proof before she could bear to break my heart. Meanwhile, I was at the water's edge with Grace helping her gather rocks, laughing, when she found one shaped like a heart. I tucked it into her pocket so she could keep it as treasure, while only a few yards away, my husband was betraying me again. Andrew returned to the picnic not long after carrying a few sticks of firewood, his face flushed, his smile strained. Sophie slipped back separately, laughing too loudly at something someone said, as if noise could mask guilt. Rachel stood watching me, her lips pressed tightly together, her phone heavy in her hand. I was oblivious, too busy spreading out blankets, pouring drinks, and watching Grace chase butterflies across the grass. To me, it was another beautiful summer day. But beneath that calm surface, the truth had already been captured, glowing in Rachel's trembling hands. That night, when the fire burned low and most of the kids were asleep in their tents, I sat with Grace curled against me, her little head resting on my lap. The laughter of friends drifted through the night air, mixed with the hum of crickets and the gentle lapping of the lake. I remember thinking how peaceful it all was, how grateful I felt. Then my phone buzzed. At first, I assumed it was my mother checking in, maybe asking if we would stop by the cabin on the way home. But when I pulled the phone from my pocket, it was Rachel's name. There was no text, just a video file. Frowning, I tapped it open. In an instant, my world shifted. Beneath the canopy of trees not far from where we had been laughing and cooking burgers, the screen revealed Andrew, his hands on Sophie, his lips pressed to hers. The image was grainy but unmistakable. His posture, his voice faintly audible, the way he leaned into her, as though he belonged to her. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. My chest tightened, my vision blurred, and all I could hear was the blood pounding in my ears. I replayed it once, then again, hoping absurdly I had misunderstood. But the truth was undeniable. My husband, the man I trusted without question, was betraying me. The phone shook in my hands, tears streaming before I even realized I was crying. 6 years of marriage cracked apart in a few seconds of video. I clutched Grace tightly, as though holding her could keep me from collapsing. My world was burning, and she was the only anchor I had left. I don't remember walking back from the woods that night, only the weight of Grace in my arms, and the phone burning in my pocket like poison. My legs carried me on their own toward the cabin Andrew and I had rented, though my mind was numb, hollowed out by betrayal. When I pushed the door open, Andrew was already inside, sitting at the table with a beer in his hand. He looked up at my face, pale and streaked with tears, and I saw him stiffen. He knew before I even spoke. "Where were you?" I whispered, my voice shaking. He opened his mouth, but no words came. I pulled the phone from my pocket, pressed play, and held it up. The glow of the video lit the room, flickering across his face. His color drained as Sophie's laugh spilled faintly through the speakers, followed by the unmistakable sight of his lips pressed against hers. "Emily." "Please," he stammered, standing quickly. "It was a mistake, just a moment. It didn't mean anything." My chest ached so violently I thought I might break apart. "A mistake." My voice rose thick with tears. "That's what you call throwing away 6 years of marriage. That's what you call betraying your daughter." He dropped to his knees, gripping the edge of the table as though praying. His voice cracked, desperate. "You and Grace are my life. Don't leave me. I'll end it, I swear. I'll never see her again. Just give me one more chance." I shook my head violently, tears burning down my cheeks. "No, you made your choice, and now I'm making mine. I will never forgive you." The creak of the door startled me. I turned and saw Ethan Moore standing there, his jaw tight, his eyes darting from Andrew on the floor to me, clutching Grace. Rachel must have called him after I'd broken down on the phone. He didn't say much, just one steady sentence. "You don't have to stay here tonight, Emily. Come on, I'll take you home. Andrew spun toward him, anger sparking through his desperation.
Stay out of this. This is between my wife and me.
But I had already decided. My voice was steady, sharp. No, Andrew. It's not between us anymore. It's over. I clutched Grace closer and stepped past him, refusing to look back. My knees shook. My heart pounded, but I kept moving. Ethan picked up our bags without a word, his silence steadier than any comfort Andrew could have offered. Behind me, Andrew's voice cracked in the night air, pleading, begging, but I didn't stop. For the first time in years, my decision was clear. The next morning, I packed what I could and drove to my parents' house. I couldn't sleep another night in the home Andrew and I had shared. My mother fussed in the kitchen, my father took Grace for long walks, and I sat at the table staring at coffee that went cold before I touched it. The phone buzzed constantly, calls, messages, voicemails from Andrew. At first, they were long paragraphs filled with apologies and promises, then angry bursts of blame. You ruined us by walking away. If you'd just forgive me, I'd change. Sophie means nothing. You're my family. But just as quickly, his tone shifted again. Maybe I don't need you anyway. She understands me better than you ever did. I stopped reading them. Each message was another twist of the knife, another reminder that the man I thought I knew no longer existed. I heard through friends that he was still seeing Sophie, that he couldn't seem to let her go, even while begging me to return. Maybe she was easier than facing the wreckage he had caused. Andrew came to the door once. His fists pounded against the wood, his voice raw, as he shouted my name. I stood inside, Grace pressed against my hip, my heart pounding, but I didn't open it. Eventually his voice broke, and I heard the crunch of gravel as he walked away. The silence that followed was louder than his begging. It was final. Through it all, Ethan quietly became a constant presence. At first, it was practical, fixing a leaky faucet, hauling boxes from the house I couldn't bear to enter, repairing Grace's bike chain when it slipped. But slowly, his help became something deeper. He never pushed, never asked questions I wasn't ready to answer. Sometimes, he sat on the porch with me while Grace played in the yard, both of us sipping coffee in silence. Other times, he distracted me with stories from work or lighthearted memories of his childhood with Rachel. He filled the empty spaces Andrew had left, not with promises or demands, but with steady kindness. One night, after a long day of caring for a feverish Grace, I was exhausted, my body weak from lack of sleep. Ethan arrived with groceries Rachel had sent. He noticed instantly, set the bags on the counter, and quietly began making tea. I sat at the table, tears threatening again, until he placed the cup in front of me and rested a gentle hand on my shoulder. The warmth of that simple gesture nearly undid me. I wanted to collapse into his arms, to let someone else hold the weight I'd been carrying. I leaned forward slightly, but before I crossed that line, Ethan pulled back. His voice was low, firm, but kind. Emily, you've been through too much. You need space to heal, not someone new to cling to. At first, his restraint stung. But later, I realized it was the most respectful thing he could have done. He wasn't there to replace Andrew. He wasn't there to be my savior. He was there because he cared, because he wanted to see me stand on my own again. That night, for the first time since everything had fallen apart, I saw a faint outline of who I could be without Andrew. Not broken, not abandoned, but stronger than I had ever imagined. The weeks that followed passed in a haze of adjustments and quiet rebuilding. At first, I felt hollow, as though my life had been stripped down to bare walls and empty rooms. Yet slowly, almost imperceptibly, I began filling that space again, not with Andrew's apologies or the noise of his betrayals, but with small moments of my own choosing. Grace and I made new routines. Saturday morning pancakes became our tradition. sticky hands, and flowers scattered across the counter. On Sundays, we walked to the farmer's market, her tiny hand clutching mine as we browsed rows of fresh produce and homemade pies. At night, when she curled up against me and begged for just one more story, I realized that those quiet rituals were more sacred than any grand gesture Andrew had ever given me. Andrew's presence faded into the background of whispers. Friends told me he still clung to Sophie, though their relationship seemed to crack as quickly as it had started. Perhaps it was built on secrecy and stolen moments unable to survive in daylight. I stopped asking. He was no longer my responsibility, no longer the center of my world. I had freed myself from that burden. The day I filed for divorce, I expected to cry. Instead, I walked into the courthouse with a calmness I didn't recognize. The clerk slid the papers across the desk, and I signed my name with a steady hand. 6 years of marriage reduced to ink on paper, yet I didn't feel the collapse of something precious. I felt the lifting of chains I had carried far too long. When I stepped back into the daylight, the air seemed lighter, almost sweet. Andrew tried one last time to change my mind. He stood outside my parents' house, his voice hoarse from shouting, begging me to reconsider. "We can fix it, Emily. For Grace. For us." I opened the door just long enough to give him the truth he refused to hear. "You lost me the moment you chose her. You lost Grace when you betrayed her family. Go. There is nothing left here for you." His face crumpled, but I did not waver. He turned and walked away. That was the last time I ever saw him. Life without him was not easy. There were nights I reached across an empty bed and felt the sharp sting of absence. Mornings when the ache of betrayal weighed heavier than sleep. But slowly, the spaces he left behind were filled not with sorrow, but with resilience. Grace's laughter became my anchor. My parents' support became a steady shield, and Ethan's quiet presence reminded me that kindness could exist without condition. He never pressed for more than I could give. He never asked for explanations I wasn't ready to share. Instead, he helped in small ways, tightening a loose hinge, carrying groceries, reading to Grace when I was too tired to keep my eyes open. In those ordinary moments, he showed me something Andrew never had, that love, if it came again, did not have to roar. It could whisper patient and steady waiting until I was strong enough to hear it. One evening, I sat on the porch watching the sun dip low, Grace playing in the yard with a set of chalks drawing crooked hearts on the pavement. Ethan sat beside me, a mug of coffee in his hand, his gaze steady on the horizon. For a long time, neither of us spoke. Then he said quietly, "You're stronger than you know, Emily. Stronger than most." I didn't answer, but I let his words settle in my chest. For the first time, I believed them. In time, laughter returned to my life. Not the forced laughter I had used to cover cracks in my marriage, but real laughter, bubbling and unexpected. It came in Grace's squeals when I pushed her on the swings, and my mother's teasing over my cooking, and Rachel's knowing grin when she saw me smile again. It came even in Ethan's dry humor when he patched the screen door for the 3rd time. Looking back, I realized something vital. Andrew had taken my marriage, my trust, and the picture-perfect family I thought I had. But he hadn't taken me. He hadn't taken my worth, my ability to love, or my right to rebuild. Betrayal had stripped me bare, but in that bareness, I discovered the strength to stand on my own. If there is one truth I carry now, it is this: trust once broken can never return unchanged. But sometimes, the breaking is what sets you free. I lost a husband, but I gained clarity, resilience, and the chance to redefine family on my own terms. Grace became my compass, pointing me toward a life not built on lies, but on love that was honest and enduring. And in choosing myself, I discovered that I was never truly alone. So here I stand, not as the woman Andrew betrayed, but as Emily Carter, a mother, a survivor, and someone who finally understands that love should never come at the cost of dignity. My life did not end with betrayal. It began again with truth. If this story touched you, please like, share, subscribe, and comment below to support the channel and help bring more stories of resilience, healing, and hope to light.